My son booted me out because his wife didn't want an extra person to feed. 3 months later, I owned the building they live in and tripled their rent. I never imagined I'd find myself standing on the cold street, a suitcase in my hand, staring at the door I once called home. The same door my son slammed shut on me, with a look that said I was no longer welcome. His wife had whispered in his ear, planting that poisonous seed, that I was a burden, a drain on their life, a man who no longer belonged under their roof. But that day, as I walked away, something inside me snapped. Not anger, not desperation, but a quiet resolve. They thought kicking me out was the end. They didn't realize it was just the beginning. My name is David, and this is the story of how the son who threw me away learned what it means to lose a father, and how I took back my place, not with violence, but with a power they never saw coming. I wasn't always a man who had to fight for respect. I worked hard for decades, building a life, putting my family first. I gave everything to ensure my son had a better future. Yet when times got tough for me, when I needed them most, they cast me aside like I was nothing. That night on the street, I didn't cry. I planned. 3 months later, I signed the papers. The building where my son and his wife lived was mine. I looked at that faded brick wall and felt a surge of triumph. Then came the letter, the new rent, tripled, with a deadline. They never called, they never begged, and I finally took my place at the table again. But this story isn't just about revenge. It's about respect, family, and what happens when love turns cold. If you think this is the end, you're wrong. The real story begins now. They say blood is thicker than water, but when I stood outside that door, I wondered if that was true. My son, the boy I raised with my own hands, had turned into a stranger, a man who looked at me like I was a problem to be solved by throwing me out. I remember the exact moment his wife told him, her voice cold and sharp like a knife, "We can't have him here anymore. It's too much an extra person to feed, to worry about." And my son, the man I once taught to be kind and responsible, nodded and said nothing. I packed my few belongings into an old suitcase, each item heavier than the last with the weight of betrayal. No goodbyes, no apologies, just a slammed door and the echo of a family breaking apart. But I wasn't broken. I spent that first night in a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling, thinking back to all the sacrifices I made, the long hours I worked, the empty dinners I ate so my son and his wife could have more, the dreams I set aside so they could chase theirs. All of it thrown away like garbage. I asked myself, how did it come to this? When did I become a burden? Then it hit me they didn't want me because I reminded them of a life they'd rather forget, a past they wanted to bury. But I refused to disappear quietly. I began researching, talking to real estate agents, learning how to buy property. I wasn't rich, but I had enough saved, enough to make a move that would shake them to their core. And then I found it, the building where they lived, a rundown apartment block that no one else wanted. I made the call, met the owner, and sealed the deal. When I signed that contract, I felt a fire ignite inside me. This wasn't just about money, it was about standing up, reclaiming my dignity. The day the rent increase letters went out, I waited by the mailbox like a soldier waiting for battle. I imagined the shock on their faces when they realized the man they discarded was now the one holding the reins. I didn't want to ruin them. I just wanted to make sure they understood what it means to lose a father. And now, every month, as they scramble to pay the rent I set, I watch quietly from a distance. Not out of spite, but to remind myself that sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who teach us the hardest lessons. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about standing tall when the world pushes you down, about finding strength you didn't know you had, and maybe, just maybe, about what it truly means to be family. I'll never forget the first time I held my son in my arms. He was so small, so fragile, and yet, in that moment, I felt like the strongest man alive. His little fingers wrapped around mine, and I made a silent promise. No matter what happens, I will protect you. I will give you everything I never had. Back then, I was a young man with calloused hands and aching knees. I worked construction jobs by day and cleaned office buildings by night. There were weeks I only slept a few hours, just enough to keep going, but I did it gladly. Every dollar I earned, every hour I bled into the earth, it was for him. For his future, I wanted him to grow up with options, not chains. And when his mother passed away, everything changed. That night, I came home to find her lying cold on the floor, a half-finished dinner on the stove. I broke in ways I didn't think a man could break. I didn't cry in front of him, not once. I had to be strong. I had to be everything: mother, father, protector, teacher. I never remarried. I couldn't. My life became him. I paid for his schooling, helped him buy his first car, even covered the deposit on the apartment he now lives in, the same one he'd later force me out of. I didn't expect repayment. I didn't expect a medal. I only wanted what every parent wants: respect. But somewhere along the way he changed. It started small, shorter phone calls, missed birthdays, excuses for not visiting. Then came his wife. I tried to welcome her. I really did. I smiled through her coldness, through her backhanded compliments, through the way she always looked past me like I was invisible. And then one night, over dinner it happened, I had offered to cook. Nothing fancy, just some old recipes I knew he loved as a kid. I was standing at the stove when I overheard them whispering in the living room. She was angry, tired. Said she didn't sign up for taking care of an old man, that she was done feeding extra mouths. I froze. Then he said it. I'll talk to him. Talk to me. No. What he meant was, I'll get rid of him. The next morning, he asked me to leave. No anger, no shouting, just a stiff jaw and eyes that wouldn't meet mine. He said it wasn't working. Said they needed space, that it was temporary. I knew better. The tone in his voice wasn't of a son asking his father to understand. It was of a man discarding a problem. So I packed my bag, one suitcase. That's all I took from a life built around them. I walked down those stairs with years of sacrifice on my back and no place to go. But I didn't crumble. Instead, I started remembering who I was before I gave everything away. I was a builder, a planner, a man who could create something out of nothing. I used to lay down foundations for other people's homes. It was time I laid one for myself. And so every day I walked, I read, I listened, I learned. I went from motels to libraries to meetings with agents. I studied market values, neighborhood trends, legal documents. I began to see the cracks in their apartment building, not just the physical ones, but the financial ones too. The place was ripe for a sale: old owner, tired management, rising prices in the area. I made an offer. I played it smart, quiet, no names, no noise, and then I signed the papers. It was mine, the building. The power, the pen, and with that pen I rewrote the rules. The rent was tripled, effective immediately. I didn't target them specifically, no. I simply reminded them that the world doesn't owe anyone comfort. Not even them. I watched from a distance. I saw the mail get delivered, the way she tore the letter open, the way his face dropped, the panic, the arguments, the blame. He still doesn't know it was me, not yet. But he will, because some lessons aren't taught with words, they're taught with consequences. He still doesn't know it was me. Not yet, but he will. And when that moment comes, when he finally realizes that the man he cast out like yesterday's trash now holds the very keys to the roof over his head, he won't just feel the sting of betrayal. He'll feel loss because I wasn't just his father. I was his safety net, his foundation, the silent force who carried him further than he ever walked on his own. They say time heals all wounds. That's not true. Some wounds don't heal, they harden. They turn into scars. And every time you look at them, they remind you of what you survived and who caused it. For weeks after I bought the building, I kept to myself. I didn't show my face. I didn't want revenge that looked like vengeance, no. I wanted dignity and justice, wrapped in silence. The kind of justice that didn't require shouting, only silence and consequence. But deep down, I'll admit, I wondered if he'd reach out. If some small ember of guilt might push him to call, to check in, to say anything, he didn't, not a word. Not a message, not a single knock on my door. Maybe pride, maybe shame. Maybe he was too far gone. One day, I found myself sitting across from the building in a parked car, just watching. It was late, just past midnight. His apartment window was lit. I could see shadows, the movement of his wife pacing, the soft flicker of a television, then the window going dark. That used to be the moment I'd tuck him into bed, back when he was a boy. I'd kiss his forehead and whisper, "You're safe. I've got you." Now, he didn't even know I was just across the street. Isn't it strange how life can turn full circle? The man who once protected him from the cold was now the very reason they felt it. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the building manager, Unit 4C. He said, "They're behind on rent, a month and a half now. What do you want to do?" I paused. I could have forgiven the debt. I could have called my son and said, "Don't worry, I've got it covered, just like I always have." But that's what the old me would have done. The man they discarded, the man who let love blind him to truth, so I said, "Let the notice go through, no exceptions," and then I hung up. I'll be honest, I didn't feel proud, I didn't feel powerful, I felt tired, because this wasn't the story I ever wanted to live in. I didn't raise a son so that one day I could own the floor beneath his feet. I raised a son because I believed in him, because I loved him, because I saw in him all the good I hoped to leave behind. But love doesn't always grow the way you plant it. Sometimes it grows wild, turns bitter, chokes the very roots that fed it. A week later, I was walking out of the corner cafe, coffee in hand, when I saw him. My son, standing at the end of the street. He hadn't seen me yet. He looked older, not by age, but by weight. A heaviness in his shoulders, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from life not going the way you expected. He turned arm around his wife, holding an envelope in his hand, a red notice sticking out. Eviction warning. His wife was talking fast, animated, probably angry. He was quiet, defeated, nodding like a man who was listening, but not really there. And in that moment, I saw a reflection, not of myself, but of who I could have been, if I'd given up every time life turned against me. And yet, here I was not on the street, not broken, but rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and yes, alone. I watched him from the corner, that envelope trembling in his hand like a verdict passed down from the universe itself. And in a way it was justice, but justice doesn't always taste sweet. Sometimes it's bitter. Cold, heavy in the chest, I could have crossed the street, could have said something, but I didn't. I turned and walked away, not out of cowardice, no, out of restraint, out of the painful discipline it takes to let someone feel the weight of their choices. Because that's the thing no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't bring peace, it brings clarity. And clarity, my friend, is far more powerful. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my small, modest apartment, the one I'd bought for myself after I purchased the building. It wasn't grand, just a single room, a tiny kitchen, a soft chair by the window. But it was mine, and it was quiet. Too quiet? I stared out at the streetlight flickering on the corner, and my mind kept circling one thought. What turned him against me? Was it the pressure from his wife? Was it pride? Was it just convenience, removing the old man, so he could play house without the echoes of his past sitting on the couch? Or worse, was it me? Had I been too strict when he was young, too absent when I worked all those long shifts? Had I been so focused on providing that I forgot to connect? I hated how these questions haunted me. Because even after everything, part of me still loved him. That's the curse of fatherhood. No matter how far they drift, your heart keeps them tethered. Even when it hurts, the next morning I made my coffee, black, bitter, like the thoughts swirling in my head, and opened the rent ledger. Unit 4C, 1 month and 22 days overdue. Almost time, almost eviction. The final nail in the coffin of a relationship already 6 feet under. And yet I hesitated, because this wasn't just a transaction. This was my son, a man I held when he cried, a boy I taught to ride a bike, a child I stayed up with all night when he had that fever, back when he was 5, and I thought I might lose him. That night I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter, not to him, to myself, a way to bleed out the thoughts I couldn't say aloud. A letter filled with anger, love, grief, and guilt. I didn't send it. I folded it neatly and placed it in a box where I kept old photos, one of him as a toddler, sitting on my shoulders, smiling like I was the whole world. Back then, maybe I was. The building manager called again. "Sir, eviction's ready. We'll post the notice tomorrow unless you say otherwise." My mouth was dry. I could have ended it right there, pulled the plug, let him fall, but then I said something I hadn't planned. Hold off, give it another week. Silence on the other end. Understood. Why did I delay? I don't know. Maybe I wanted him to find a way out. Maybe I wanted him to see me. Maybe I just wasn't ready to become the man who destroyed his own blood. But time, as always, has its own plans. 3 days later, I was walking past the laundromat on 6th and Broadway when I saw her, his wife, alone. On the phone, her voice was sharp, panicked. She was pacing, waving her free hand in frustration. I stopped outside, pretending to check my phone, listening. "No, I told you we can't afford that. Not this month, not with this new landlord. I don't know who he is. He tripled the rent out of nowhere." She turned, facing the street, and for a brief second our eyes met. She froze. I didn't. I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked away, heart pounding like war drums in my chest. She knew. She didn't say it, but I saw it in her face, the horror, the realization, the fear. It wasn't about the rent anymore. It was about the hand behind it, my hand. That evening, there was a knock at my door. I knew who it would be before I even stood up. And when I opened it, there he was, my son, older than I remembered, tired, eyes heavy, jaw tight, voice low. He didn't say hello, didn't smile. He just said, "Why?" I stepped aside, gestured for him to come in. He hesitated, then walked in like a man stepping into a memory he didn't want to confront. I poured 2 glasses of water, sat across from him. We stared at each other in silence, 2 men with a lifetime of unspoken words hanging between them like smoke. Finally, I said, "You threw me out like a stranger." He looked down, I know. "Did you expect nothing would come back to you?" He looked up. And for the first time I saw regret, real regret. Not just the kind you wear to escape punishment, but the kind that weighs you down from the inside out. "I didn't think," he whispered. I just listened to her. Things were tight, she thought. I cut him off. She thought I was a burden. He nodded. "And you agreed." He swallowed, didn't deny it. We sat in silence again. The air between us thick with years of resentment. And then I said something that surprised even me. "I didn't raise you to be cruel." His voice cracked. "I know, I messed up. I was scared. I had no job then. Rent was piling up. She was pressuring me. I thought I'd have time to fix it, to come back, and you never came back." He was crying now. Silent tears. Shameful tears. The kind that don't seek forgiveness. Only acknowledgement. His tears came slowly, quiet, broken things, slipping down his face like memories that hurt too much to hold. I didn't reach for him. I didn't offer comfort, because comfort wasn't what he needed. He needed to feel it, to sit in the ashes of what he burned, to understand what it means to push away someone who built you from the ground up. We sat there in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that comes only between two people who used to be close, where words aren't enough and maybe never will be. And then, softly, I asked him something I had been carrying like a stone in my chest for months. "Why didn't you fight for me?" His eyes snapped up, red and wet. I didn't know how. I shook my head. "That's not true. You just didn't want to." He opened his mouth, closed it, and in that moment I saw it, the boy I raised. He was still in there, buried under pride, fear, shame, and her voice. "I was weak," he said finally. "I was tired, and I thought you'd be fine. You're strong. You've always been strong. That was the problem." They all think the strong ones don't bleed, but I did bleed, quietly, alone, in motels, in bus stations, in long walks around neighborhoods I'd never seen before, just to forget that I had no place left to go. "You weren't just my son," I told him. "You were my reason, and when you shut that door on me, I didn't lose shelter. I lost my purpose." He broke down, fully, head in his hands. "I'm sorry, Dad. God, I'm so sorry. It didn't fix anything, but it was a start." We sat in that little apartment for hours. He told me things I didn't know, how the pressure of his marriage, his job loss, the debts piling up had made him bitter, reckless. How his wife slowly pulled the strings, made him believe I was the problem, not the person who held everything together. I listened, not because I agreed, but because I needed to hear him bleed. Then he asked me something that nearly broke me. "Can we fix this?" I didn't answer right away, because forgiveness isn't a switch. It's not a thing you hand out just because someone asks nicely. It's earned, rebuilt brick by brick, just like I rebuilt my life after he tore it down. "You want to fix this?" I said. "Then show me. Don't say it, prove it." He nodded, wiping his face. "How?" I stood up, walked to the drawer, pulled out the new lease for Unit 4C, laid it on the table in front of him. A number was circled, a rent figure far lower than the one he had received. The original rate, pre-revenge, pre-eviction. He stared at it, confused. "I don't understand. That's the rent," I said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I needed to remind myself I'm still your father, and being a father means choosing mercy even when it hurts." He broke again. Quietly, "I'll pay it," he whispered, "every month on time, and I'll call, I'll visit, I'll be better." I nodded. "Start by telling her," I said. "Tell your wife who owns the building. Let her know what mercy looks like." He flinched, but agreed. He left that night without fanfare. No hugs, no dramatic music. Just a man walking out into the dark, carrying the weight of his choices. And me, I sat alone again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. A quiet earned through fire. 3 weeks passed. The rent came in early. A note was folded into the envelope. Just 2 words, written in his handwriting: "Thank you." I didn't reply, not yet, because rebuilding trust isn't about thank yous. It's about consistency. 3 weeks passed. The rent came in early. Neatly stacked bills inside a plain envelope. No smudges, no coffee stains, no crumpled corners. Everything about it felt intentional. Like he wanted me to know he was trying. And tucked between the papers was a folded note. No fancy card, no signature, just 2 words, written in that familiar crooked handwriting from all those years ago when he used to scribble on my workbooks as a boy. "Thank you." Simple. Honest, weighty. I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't know how to respond, but because, for the first time in months, I felt something inside me loosen. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. The wall I built the night I stood on the curb with a suitcase and a shaking hand, pretending I still had somewhere to go. I didn't reply, not immediately, because trust, real trust, doesn't come back with an envelope or 2 polite words. It comes back slowly, like spring thawing a frozen field. It demands consistency, effort, time, and I needed to see if he truly understood that. 1 week later, I received another envelope, this time with a longer note. Still no grand speeches, no dramatic apologies, just a quiet message scribbled in pen. I told her. I told my wife everything, who owns the building, what I did to you, and why I regret it every day. There was a second note underneath it in different handwriting, delicate, round, neater, her handwriting. Mr. Dawson, I was wrong. I judged you, I blamed you, and I convinced your son to walk away from the one man who never gave up on him. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know I see you now. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of those words sink in, not for her, but for him. Because if she was reaching out, that meant he was talking, really talking, owning what he did, and maybe, just maybe, growing. I didn't reply to her either, not because I didn't appreciate the gesture, but because I needed the silence to do its work. Forgiveness is like soil. You can't just water it once and expect something to grow. You have to wait. Nurture, protect, and watch what takes root. That Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I took a walk, not to clear my head, not to escape the weight of my past, but to feel the sun, to breathe. To remember that life keeps moving even when people stop loving you the way they should. And halfway through that walk, I found myself outside their apartment building. Not by accident. I knew exactly where I was going. I looked up at the window, Unit 4C. The curtains were drawn back slightly. I saw movement, laughter maybe, and for a moment, just a flicker, I saw a shadow, a child, small. Darting across the room, a new face. He hadn't told me. I had a grandchild, and just like that, my knees nearly gave out. Because everything I'd held back, the pain, the pride, the armor I'd wrapped around my soul, started to crack. And in that single, quiet moment, the story changed. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about justice. It was about legacy, and whether the man they once threw away could still become something more. I stood there on the sidewalk, frozen. People walked past me, mothers pushing strollers, couples hand in hand, teenagers laughing into their phones. The world kept moving, unaware that mine had just shifted. A grandchild, a piece of my blood, a thread of my name. A continuation of everything I thought had been cut off. I don't know how long I stood there staring up at that window, watching the shadows move. But time didn't matter in that moment, because something ancient inside me, something I thought had gone cold, began to stir. Not anger, not pride, but something deeper, hope. He never told me, not in the letter, not in the visit. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe he thought I wouldn't care. Maybe he was just scared. But I cared. God help me, I cared more than I wanted to admit. Because in that flicker of a child's movement, in that blur of joy behind a curtain, I saw a second chance. Not to rewrite the past, but to protect the future. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to all the moments I missed. The birth, the first steps, the cries in the night that I wasn't there to soothe, the bedtime stories I never told. Regret is a strange thing. It doesn't always come with loud thunder. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in memories that never happened. The next day I got dressed early, cleaned up, shaved, ironed my shirt. I didn't know why. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't invited, but something in me said, show up. So I walked to the building, no anger, no papers in my hand, no rent notices, just me. And when I knocked on the door of Unit 4C, my heart was beating so loud I thought they might hear it through the wood. There was a pause, then the door opened. It wasn't my son, it was her, the woman who once whispered poison. The woman who helped drive a wedge between father and son. She looked at me, not like before, no coldness. No wall, just surprise, and something that looked like a humility. Mr. Dawson, she said, voice soft. Hi, I nodded. Is he home? She stepped aside. He is. Come in. The apartment looked different than I remembered. Cleaner, warmer, more live. looked in, and there, on the couch, he sat, holding a baby, my grandson. He looked up, eyes wide, unsure. I stood frozen in the doorway, caught in a lifetime of emotions that didn't know where to land. And then the baby looked at me. Just a glance, just a blink, but in that look everything changed. I stepped forward slowly. He stood, gently cradling the child. And then, without a word, he offered him to me. My hands shook, not from age, but from meaning. The moment he passed that child into my arms, it was like all the years of pain, the betrayal, the silence, the tears, collapsed under the weight of something new. Something pure, something sacred. Legacy. I held him, that tiny, perfect boy, and I whispered almost to myself, "I'm your grandfather." He stared up at me with wide, curious eyes. Eyes I recognized, my son's eyes, my eyes. For the first time in years I let the tears come. Soft, silent, holy. Not out of sorrow, but out of grace. I looked at my son. He was crying too, and in that moment no words were needed. We were two broken men holding the future in our hands, not perfect, not healed, but finally beginning again. The first time I held my grandson, I realized something I hadn't understood in all my years of being a father. Some wounds are meant to stay open just long enough to let love back in. He was warm, tiny, soft as breath, and when his fingers curled instinctively around mine, something in me, something tired and rusted, began to wake up. He didn't know my story. He didn't know how broken the air around him once was. He just knew touch, warmth, presence, and in that simple act, I found a reason to let go of the past, not because it didn't matter, but because this moment mattered more. My son didn't say much that day, neither did I. Sometimes the deepest healing doesn't need words. It just needs time and the courage to stand in the same room with the people who hurt you. We sat together, me, him, and the baby in silence for a long time. He made coffee. She brought over a plate of warm toast. Simple things, but I noticed them. Because kindness, when you've been starved of it, feels like a feast. A few days later I got a call from him. "Hey," he said, "would you want to come by again? He keeps looking at the door like he's waiting for you." My heart stilled. I wanted to say something light, a joke, maybe, but I couldn't, because I was too full of something that didn't need to be named. I said, "Yeah, I'd like that." And just like that, the visits became a rhythm. Every Thursday at 10 a.m. I'd knock on the door. Not as the landlord, not as the man who tripled their rent, but as David, as Dad, as Grandpa, and slowly the ice melted. The baby started crawling. I was there. He said his first word. I heard it, Dada. He said it looking at my son, but I felt it like an earthquake in my chest. One morning, I brought over a small wooden rocking horse, handmade, polished, the kind I'd always wanted to build but never had the time. He loved it. His laughter filled the room, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, so did mine. We never had some grand sit-down talk, no dramatic apology on bended knee, but over time, they started telling the truth through their actions. Inviting me for dinner, asking for advice, leaning in instead of pulling away. And every now and then, when she handed me the baby, she'd hold my hand a second longer than she needed to, her way of saying, "I see you. I respect you. I was wrong." She never said those words out loud. She didn't have to. I felt it in the way she made space for me. And that was enough. One afternoon, my son and I were sitting on the balcony. The baby was asleep. The air was quiet, heavy with golden light. He looked at me, a long, searching look, and said, "You've changed." I smiled. "So have you." He nodded. I used to think strength was silence. Now I know it's showing up, even after everything's broken. I sipped my coffee and said, "You learned that the hard way." "Yeah." He laughed softly. "But I learned it. Forgiveness didn't happen all at once. It came in layers, in shared meals, in bedtime stories. In the way he started calling me when he was stressed instead of shutting down. In the way his wife saved a seat for me at every holiday table. Piece by piece, The broken mirror of our relationship began to reflect something whole again, not the same as before. Maybe better, maybe realer, because now we saw each other with all the cracks and chose to stay. I still live in the same apartment, simple, quiet, but every morning I walk out into the sun knowing I'm not alone. I'm not someone's burden, I'm not an extra mouth. I'm a father, a grandfather, a man who was cast aside and climbed back, not to seek revenge, but to reclaim his worth. Not through fury, but through grace. Some stories start with betrayal, some with pain, mine did too. But the ending was never about winning. It was about becoming a man my grandson would be proud to look up to. Years passed, seasons came and went. The baby I once held in trembling hands began to walk, then run, then climb into my lap with stories of dinosaurs and pirates and dreams of flying. He called me Grandpa D, and every time he said it, it felt like my name was being rewritten in gold. My son and I built something we never had before, not just a father-son relationship, but a friendship. We fished together in quiet lakes. We fixed the broken radiator in his car. He'd call just to talk. And sometimes he'd show up at my door, baby in one arm, 6, back in the other, saying, "I just needed some time with you." I never said no. One day, when the boy was about 8, he came to me with a shoebox. Inside it, a collection of scribbled drawings. One was of me, holding him, smiling. Above it, in shaky letters, he had written, "My grandpa is my hero." I felt the wind get knocked out of me. He didn't know my past. He didn't know what I'd lost, or how much I'd once hated the man in the mirror. But somehow he saw only the best in me. That's what children do. They see who you can be, not who you were. As I got older, my hands shook more, my knees ached. The stairs felt longer, but my heart, it had never been stronger. Because I had something most people spend their whole lives chasing, peace. One evening, we were all sitting around the dinner table. My son, his wife, the boy now 12, and me. The laughter was real. The food was good. The warmth in that room undeniable. After dessert, my son raised a glass to my father. He said, the man who taught me how to be one. I didn't know what to say. I just looked down at my plate, wiped a tear with the back of my hand, and whispered, "Thank you." Years later, I got sick. Not dramatic, not sudden, just tired, the kind of tired that doesn't go away. They ran tests. The doctor's voice was gentle but clear. "It's time to rest." I didn't fight it. I'd fought enough battles in my life, but what I did do was right. I wrote a letter to my grandson. I didn't talk about revenge. I didn't talk about pain. I told him the truth. That life will disappoint him, that people will fail him, that sometimes even the people he loves most will hurt him. But I also told him this: you are not what happens to you. You are who you choose to become after it. I wrote about forgiveness, about strength, about how being kind when you have every reason not to is the greatest power a man can hold. He read that letter at my funeral. Voice shaking, hands gripping the paper like it was the last piece of me he could hold. And when he was done, he looked up at everyone in that room and said, "My grandfather lost everything and still chose love. He didn't just teach me how to live, he taught me how to stand back up." I was buried on a quiet hill under a tall oak tree. No fancy tombstone, just my name, the years I lived, and 5 words beneath it. He showed up every time, and that's my story. Not of revenge, but of return, of a man who was cast aside and found his way home, not through power, not through punishment, but through the soft, steady echo of love that refused to give up, even when everyone else had.